welcome into this week's Weather Extra. Thanks for joining us today. I'm meteorologist Jillian Johnson. The first significant lake effect snowstorm of the season wreaked havoc across several states early last week. Travelers in portions of New York, Pennsylvania, and Ohio dealt with whiteout conditions and feet of snow. Jen Sullivan kicks off Weather Extra as we take a look at the dangerous driving conditions across parts of the Northeast last week.
A powerful winter storm pummeling parts of the Northeast, creating dangerous driving conditions.
Visibility is pretty low.
The storm impacting more than 3 million Americans.
It was pretty slick. The hills were pretty good plowed, though.
It's the first significant lake effect snowstorm of the season, dumping several inches of snow in some areas around the Great Lakes. Parts of New York State buried under a foot or more of snow Tuesday, with up to 3 inches falling per hour at times, creating these whiteout conditions.
It was a little crazy. A foot of snow in the road for about 8 miles.
A similar situation in Erie County, Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania Department of Transportation saying the slick roads causing several spinouts.
We got multiple people off the road.
And the Ohio Department of Transportation tweeting this, warning drivers in the Cleveland area that even their snowplows were having a hard time getting around. Ohio State Highway Patrol confirming multiple crashes. The blizzard-like conditions forcing more than 100 schools in the Cleveland area to close Tuesday. In New York, I'm Jen Sullivan reporting.
The month of November is officially behind us, and what a busy month it was. Central Texas had a mixed bag of chilly days, along with some warm spring-like days and some much-needed rainfall, too. Take a look. The month of November ended with rainfall across Central Texas, but we still saw below normal rainfall amounts throughout the entire month. On average, 2.71 inches of rain falls in the month of November in Central Texas. This year, we had 1.95 inches of rain fall at the Waco Regional Airport. There were 22 rain-free days and 8 days where we had rain falling from the sky. Here's another thing to add. The wettest November ever for Central Texas was back in 1902 when 10.36 inches of rain fell. But the following year in 1903, not a single drop of rain fell at the airport throughout the month. As far as temperatures go, last month, we had 12 days with warmer than normal temperatures and 15 days cooler than normal. The average high for November is 68.8 degrees. This year, we had an average high of 67.5 degrees, so we were a little more than a degree cooler than normal. Our temperatures oftentimes swing throughout the month of November due to cold fronts finally making their way south. The hottest temperature in any November on record was 92 degrees, which happened 3 different years in 2017, 1988, and 1948. This month, our hottest day was on November 7th when we climbed up to 84 degrees. Now, the coldest temperature ever recorded in November was 17 degrees back in 1976. Our coldest temperature this month, and when we recorded our first freeze of the season, was back on November 2nd, when temperatures dropped to 30 degrees at Waco Regional. This date also ties 2 other years for the 9th earliest freeze on record. We hit 28 degrees back in 1951 and 31 degrees back in 1991. Our first freeze of the season came about 20 days earlier than normal, which is usually around November 22nd. Now, freezing temperatures play a role in leaves changing color, oftentimes kickstarting that process. Across the nation, beautiful fall colors have been on display throughout the month of November, but with winter quickly approaching, for many, the peak colors of the season have now passed, and we'll continue to see all of those leaves fall off those trees. But you may be wondering how and why leaves turn a certain color. Well, Dan Smith has the answer in your Moment of Science.
Here's a primer on the how and why behind your favorite fall color changes. Chlorophyll is in every green plant you see. It's not the only ingredient in leaves, but it's how they make food from sunlight through photosynthesis. More sunlight in the summer months means those leaves stay nice and green. Suddenly, here comes that fall chill and less sunlight too. A layer of cells cuts off leaf nutrients at the stem. The remaining chlorophyll in the leaf is broken down and eventually used up entirely before that leaf falls. But it's what that lack of chlorophyll reveals that makes for those flashy forest scenes. There are other types of pigments in leaves after all. Carotenoids are produced in plant cells during the growing season, same as chlorophyll. That's what gives you your yellow and orange colors to those fall leaves, plus food like bananas, corn, and, well, carrots. It's right there in the name. Anthocyanins are your red, blue, and purple-hued natural features. They're only made in leaves during the fall as they take advantage of excess sugars. But year-round, they're found in red apples, cherries, blueberries, and the like. Also a good anti-inflammatory for us humans. Leaves change color while they're still attached to the tree, and for good reason. The tree conserves and reabsorbs that energy. When things warm up again, the growing leaves can then regenerate that broken down chlorophyll, or for remaining leaves in fall, turn just a little bit greener for a last hurrah in the waning weeks of the season. Waning sunlight is kind of inevitable, but local weather patterns play a major role in peak fall color. Your best bet lies with warm, dry, and sunny days coupled with cool and crisp nights, as long as it stays above freezing. Summer drought can also delay that peak by a few weeks. For this week's Moment of Science, I'm Dan Smith.
And those leaves are still falling off those trees across central Texas, and you may be procrastinating and picking them up. But do you really need to break your back by wiping the multicolored landscape clean? It turns out you do have options, and they come with varying degrees of effort. Take a look.
There's no question they are a beautiful seasonal transition. But if they're still hanging over your head, you might want to wait so you don't have to do this more than once. And when you do grab the rake, do you really need to get rid of all of them?
Depending on the type of leaf that it is and the abundance or lack of abundance of leaves that you have will help us determine that.
Penn State turf expert Jeff Fowler says when it comes to abundance, remember, they are creating a blanket over your grass, which is a living, breathing plant.
If we let them lay and there's an overabundance of leaves, we're going to suffocate the plant. And we don't want to do that.
So grab the mower.
Mulch them down and bag them through a lawnmower, and then put them in a big pile and let them degrade, let them rot.
If you've got a spot to do that, it could save you a lot of money on fertilizer next year.
Really quality compost that will add nutrients and water holding capacity to your gardens or your yard.
If the carpet of leaves is more sparse, Fowler says mulching them right back into the yard also works, but be careful of the quantity.
You can still see the grass, you're in good shape.
There is an exception, though.
Oak leaves are really high in tannic acid, so we'd like to compost them before we would add them to back to the yard or back into our gardens, for example.
John Shumway, KDKA TV News.
Scientists have compared this year's soaring temperatures, fierce wildfires, powerful storms, and devastating floods to a disaster movie. They say it's all a direct impact of extraordinary high temperatures due to climate change. And new data reveals just how unprecedented the global heat has been. According to the nonprofit research group Climate Central, for the last 12 months from October 2022 to October 2023, Earth has been the warmest it's ever been in at least 125,000 years. And a second report, this one published by the European Union's Copernicus Climate Change Service, declared 2023 the hottest year ever recorded. And a new federal assessment found extreme weather events cost the U.S. economy nearly $150 billion a year. Weather and climate-related disasters, including floods, wildfires, hurricanes, and winter storms, with damages over $1 billion, are becoming more common than ever before. It found such events currently happen every 3 weeks. When adjusted for inflation, they happened every 4 months back in the 1980s. Switching gears now, and hurricane season wrapped up this past Thursday on November 30th. And according to a new study from Rowan University, hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean are now twice as likely to strengthen from a weak storm into a dangerous, powerful one in less than a day. The study found that over the past few decades, hurricanes are twice as likely to grow into a major Category 3 or higher hurricane within 24 hours. Quickly forming hurricanes make it harder to forecast, prepare, and evacuate, leading to more disasters. For example, in 2017, Hurricane Maria grew from a Category 1 to a Category 5 in less than 24 hours before making landfall. More than 3,000 people in Puerto Rico and neighboring islands were killed. We also had another example of a hurricane undergoing rapid intensification this year too, but instead of the Atlantic Ocean, it occurred in the Pacific. You're looking at some of the devastation left behind from Hurricane Otis, who made landfall near Acapulco on Mexico's southern Pacific coast back on October 25th. Otis made landfall as a Category 5 hurricane with sustained winds of 165 miles per hour, becoming the strongest hurricane in the eastern Pacific to make landfall during the satellite era. The winds within Otis increased by 115 miles per hour within 24 hours, leaving more than 1 million people living around that area with very little time to prepare and evacuate. And coming up after the break, meteorologist Sean Bellafury joins us with a recap of how the 2023 Atlantic hurricane season went. Find out how many storms formed and how the season compared to the forecast when we come back.
The 2023 hurricane season is officially in the books, and it was, well, close to a record-setting year in some regards. This was the hurricane season list for this year, and notice we almost got completely through the name list. The only two that we didn't get to were Vince and Whitney, but other than that, another very active season with not only just the 20 named storms, which would be the fourth most, but we also had 7 hurricanes and 3 major hurricanes. This year, we expected El Nino to bring a lot of wind shear to the Atlantic Basin, which it honestly did, but that wind shear, which is not good for tropical storms and hurricanes to form, that was almost completely negated by very, very warm sea surface temperatures across the Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, and into the Caribbean Sea. Only one U.S. hurricane landfall this year, but there were 6 storms that impacted the U.S. and Canada from multiple different basins as well. Taking a look back at the start of the 2023 hurricane season, yeah, you see that right. That is January 15th, 2023. Now, typically, whenever there's a slowdown in tropical storm activity, which happens, well, for the beginning of the year, the National Hurricane Center can go back and reanalyze storms. And they found that an area of low pressure just off the coast of the United States at the beginning of the year, the middle of January, briefly became subtropical as it zapped up some of the warm waters over the Gulf Stream. So this would have been a named storm, but since it happened and then was reanalyzed to have happened, it is Subtropical Storm 1. The actual start of the 2023 hurricane season, June 1st, well, it started off a little bit fast with our first named storm, Arlene, just a couple of hundred miles off the coast of Florida. That brought some rain to Florida and Cuba, but not terribly much more than that. Took a little bit of a break for the middle of June until we got to about June 20th, right around the summer solstice, when both Tropical Storm Brett and Tropical Storm Cindy formed just over the open waters of the Atlantic. Both of those storms dissipating really before they impacted much land. After those 2 storms, the next one on the list was Don, which really didn't form until the middle of July, so almost about a month between Cindy and Don. And Don just kind of spun its wheels out there in the open waters of the Atlantic, but it did become the season's first hurricane. We got a lull, a nice lull, in fact, from Don to our next named storm. But once that next named storm formed right in the middle of August, the frequency of these tropical storms and hurricanes greatly impacted. Almost 3 simultaneous storms forming at once: Tropical Storm Emily, Tropical Storm Gert, and Tropical Storm Franklin towards the middle of August. Now, outside of all of those storms, Franklin was one that not only moved across Hispaniola, but eventually became the season's first major hurricane a couple of hundred miles off the coast of the United States. Now, from there, Tropical Storm Harold made landfall in far south Texas, and then just shortly after Harold formed, we had Idalia, which was the season's only United States landfalling hurricane, making landfall as a major hurricane along Florida's Big Bend late in August, becoming the first time that Florida's Big Bend has ever seen a major hurricane landfall. Yet another year, the 5th time since 2017 that we have seen a major hurricane make landfall in the state of Florida. Now, I mentioned 6 storms impacted the United States. Well, only a couple of those storms were actually in the Atlantic Basin. The other 3 were in the Pacific. August 1st, Dora formed just off the coast of Mexico. Now, Dora became a major hurricane and passed just a couple of hundred miles to the south of Hawaii, but Hurricane Dora's strong winds, the counterclockwise flow, helped to cause those wildfires in the summer in Hawaii to really grow and blossom, literally fanning the flames, even though this hurricane didn't actually move ashore into any landmass. From there, we also had Eastern Pacific Storm Hillary, which became a hurricane moving ashore in Baja California, bringing heavy rain and flooding to California, also causing the first ever tropical storm warning to be issued for Southern California thanks to that system. After that, the Pacific season was mostly quiet until the big one happened, and that was Hurricane Otis, which formed and rapidly strengthened just off the coast of Mexico in about 24 hours time. Otis strengthened from a tropical storm into a Category 5 hurricane, which absolutely decimated the coastal community of Acapulco, becoming the first Category 5 hurricane to make landfall on Mexico's west coast. And of course, Hurricane Otis impacted central Texas's weather as well, with over 20 inches of rain falling in parts of Bosque County, really starting to chip away at some of that drought, which is great. But of course, we still do need some more rain.
Coming up after the break, we take a look at this week's Degrees of Science with meteorologist Camille Hawksworth, who spoke with a professor at Virginia Tech who led researchers in developing a new method for upcycling plastic. Find out what they discovered they could turn our plastic waste into when we come back.
How cool is this? A team led by Virginia Tech researchers has developed a new method that turns plastic trash into something far more valuable, something that we use every day. It's turning plastic trash into soap. And here to talk about the process is the man who came up with the idea, Associate Professor Greg Liu. This is actually so amazing, Greg. How did you come up with this idea?
So the idea actually comes from the chemistry instinct, because when we look at the molecules of a plastic, for example, polyethylene, which is a common grocery bag material, and the chemistry tells us that polyethylene is basically a long chain of carbon connected together. And when we look at the breakfast table, and we have butter, and we have sometimes bacon, and we have a lot of animal fat, and animal fat is actually the way and the precursor to produce soap. And the fat structure is very similar to polyethylene, except it's a much shorter chain of carbon and with some functional groups at the end. So we realized that the similarities between those two molecules, and we realized potentially we can break the polyethylene chains into shorter chains, and then we can functionalize them, and then we can produce fat, and which can be used to produce soap. So that's the idea come from.
This is cutting edge technology. Why do you think it's so important to divert plastic waste from our landfills and give it a new life?
We realized that we have a lot of waste materials from our daily use. Grocery bag is one example. Milk jar is another example, that we don't always reuse them. Of course, ideal case, we will reuse them, but it's not always the case, and a significant amount of these materials are leaked into the environment, and they're not doing any good to our environment. Actually, they contaminate our ocean, our beach, and our neighborhoods. So if we can utilize this end-of-life plastics for something else, we can reuse them in the chemical industry. I think that's a good thing for us.
This is all so exciting, and we can't wait to see what your team continues to come up with. What excites you the most about the field of sustainable chemistry?
I think what really excites me the most is that we can come up with ways that we can contribute to the community. And as a chemist and chemical engineer, what we can do is that we can come up with new ideas and see if we can bring a piece of the puzzle, and we can find a solution to the grand problem that we face today. I think using the technology, using the ideas, and using the knowledge that we have to help the community is a blessing.
To hear more about the research done, just scan the QR code right here behind me to watch the full interview on YouTube, or you can go to KWTX.com/degrees of science. Weather Extra will be right back. Welcome back to Weather Extra. It's hard to believe that Thanksgiving is already behind us and Christmas is just 22 days away. And if you don't have your Christmas tree yet, you might want to find one now. Some tree farms across the nation are experiencing shortages this season due to changes in the industry and dry weather. Alex Love reports from Pleasant Hill, Missouri.
Right now, we are closed for the 2023 Christmas season.
In just 8 days, Mike Hafner and his team sold more than 2,100 Christmas trees, which was all he had available, ready to be chopped down. All over the nation, he says farmers are experiencing similar shortages.
A lot of the growers did not get a whole lot of growth, especially in those crucial months of May and June when those trees need to be growing and weren't receiving enough moisture. And I also do some business with a grower up in Michigan. He experienced the same thing.
This year, Hafner is downsizing his Christmas tree business to pursue a new career, which is another trend he sees creating a shortage as more growers leave the industry.
What happened in 2008, a lot of folks got out and they have not gotten back in. I can tell you it's extremely difficult in order to get a contract right now to have Fraser firs shipped.
This year it only grew about that much.
In Lenexa, George Hess estimates he has about 50 trees left on his farm that are in the proper stage to be sold off.
This year I lost somewhere in the 20 to 30 seedlings, didn't make it through the summer.
Because Christmas trees take several years to grow to the ideal height for customers, Hess believes this shortage could drag on for years.
When you compound the fact that it takes 8-10 years to grow a tree, that means, 8-10 years ago there'll be that many less trees that'll be ready for harvest.
Well, thanks for tuning in. That's all we have for you on today's episode of Weather Extra. We'll see you again next weekend for another half hour of weather and science. Have a great week.